Hello, my name is Mayur.
Hello, my name is Shivam and our team name is Team Machine Learners.
We are going to present our machine learning project, which is statistical change detection for multidimensional data.
Now we will discuss about these contents, which is a problem explanation, motivation for the problem and introduction to the prior work and what is the kernel density estimator and different types of algorithms which are used in these projects and finally decision making process, how we implement the two-way test and many more. Now let's start. Now I will discuss about the problem. The problem is we have the given data set which is the FS, which is a multi-dimensional data, and F dash S is the newly observed data. So we have to find out whether newly observed data is a significantly changed from the previous distribution or not. Now let's see the further steps. Now I will discuss about the motivation for the problem, and the motivation problem explanation. We take the example of the stock market. Suppose we have the previous 20 years data of the stock market, so it has some distribution, and the red color distribution is the newly observed data. So we are trying to find the answer that whether the new distribution is significantly changed or not from the previous distribution. So if the distribution change is observed, in this case we will take a further step because this distribution can be due to the financial fraud or the some other cases maybe. Now I will discover what are the prior work had done to solve this problem. For solve this problem, for in case of the unidimensional data set, we have the many tests such as the KS test and chi-square test and many more. But for the multidimensional data, there are the very few tests available like KDQ tree test and the cross match test. But these tests have the some disadvantages like KDQ test has disadvantage suffer from the curse of dimensionality and the cross match test is computationally expensive due to the maximum matching algorithm. Now we will see the high level overview of the density test which is given in our research paper. So we have the dataset S and we are going to split randomly into the S1 and the S2 dataset, and using the S1 we have trained the this data and we find the kernel density estimate which is the parameter for the probability distribution of the S1 data. And using the newly observed data and our S2 data, we define the test statistic, which is nothing but the function of data S2 and the S dash, which is the difference between the log likelihood of the data S dash given the parameter for the distribution of S1, and the next term is the scaled log likelihood of the S2 given the parameter S1. And the step third is we calculate the critical value which is we are going to compare with the test statistic value, and finally we make the decision using this critical value.
As discussed by Shivam earlier, our first task is to find the distribution of the dataset S1. For that, we have used the kernel density estimate method. In this, what we have done is we have considered a Gaussian kernel centered at each of the sample points. So these are the Gaussian kernels as shown in the figure. When we take sum of all the Gaussian kernels, we get the distribution of the dataset, entire dataset. So as shown in the right side figure, what we are doing is we are taking sum of all the Gaussian kernel at all the sample points, and in the end we are getting the entire distribution of the dataset. So why we are considering the kernels are centered at each of the sample points? Because according to this, in the end we are getting the distribution which correctly represent the true distribution of S1. So first challenge in this is finding the bandwidth of each of the kernel functions. So what we are going to do this in the next algorithm. So we are going to find the optimal bandwidths using the log likelihood maximization method. So let us understand this log likelihood function. So this log likelihood function is the likelihood that the S1 is coming from KS1 distribution. So let us understand this equation first. So this G is Gaussian kernel which is centered at each of the data points xi. So when we take summation of all the kernels, we get the entire distribution of the dataset. So here we got the distribution of the dataset. In this, we are putting the point xj, means we are finding the density value at point xj for the distribution for the entire distribution. So we are multiplying all these density values and we are taking log over them. So in this way, we get the log likelihood function. So this is our function. We are going to maximize it with respect to the parameter bandwidth. So bandwidth is the only unknown parameter. So in this we have one crucial assumption. The assumption is we are considering that no data point is coming from the kernel which is centered at itself. This assumption is because when we don't take this assumption, then if you maximize the log likelihood function, then it will take the bandwidth values to be 0, because then only the log likelihood function is going towards infinity. So in order to avoid this, we are assuming that no point is generated by the kernel which is centered at itself. Now let us see how to calculate the optimum bandwidth values. So this is log likelihood function as I have introduced earlier. So this function is the only parameter for this function is the bandwidth. So we have to maximize the log likelihood function L with respect to bandwidth. In order to do this, what we do is we differentiate log likelihood function with respect to bandwidth and equate them to 0. So after doing so, we get this formula for the bandwidth. We can see there is capital P term here, which is this term. This capital P term is again a function of small p term, which is this term. So basically this bandwidth formula is the function of below two terms. So in order to wrap up the things, they have introduced capital P and small p term. So apart from this, the physical significance of capital P term is it represents the probability that the point xj is coming from the kernel which is centered at point xi. Small p term represents the probability density value at point xj for the kernel which is at point xi. So the optimization algorithm which they use to maximize the log likelihood function with respect to bandwidth is iterative approach. So to do this, we need initial guess to start up the things. So we need initial guess of bandwidths. We provide initial guess. We calculate small p values. Using small p values, we calculate capital P values. Then we calculate bandwidth. We put bandwidth in the formula of L to get the L value. So this L value is stored in L new variable. So this is the new log likelihood value. Aside from this, we are already carrying the previous value from the previous iteration. So that is L previous value. If the percentage change or fractional change of this log likelihood value is below certain threshold value, then we break out of the loops. Then if we break out of the loop, we already have optimum bandwidth with us. But if we don't break out of the loop, what we do is we store the L new value into L pre variable and go for the next iteration. So for the next iteration, we have these bandwidths with us, which we have calculated in this iteration. So we use this bandwidth for the next iteration, again calculate small p for the next iteration, and again calculate all the things for the next iteration, and do this until we break out of the loop. In the end of the loop, we'll have a set of optimum bandwidths for each of the sample point with us.
As algorithm 1 is discussed by the Mayur, so from the algorithm 1 we have the optimum parameter for the distribution of S1, and here we can see that S2 and the S1 is the randomly partitioned dataset from the S, and S dash is the recently observed data. So now second step is to calculate the test statistic, as you can see that it is given by this formula, and this static in this first term is small if the S dash is different from the S1, it is large otherwise. And in the second term, this is the log likelihood of S2 given the parameter of S1. So this value is always large because as you can see that S2 is coming from the S data set, and S2 and S1 are from the same data set. So this value is always large, and we can expand this formula. You can see that log likelihood is the product of all the density over the y, which is belong to the S dash, and the second term is the product of all the terms or for all y belong to the dataset S2. As expand this formula, this is density defined by the Gaussian kernel as we discussed in the previous slides. So now we'll see the next step.
So far we have got test statistic value, which is small delta. Now as told earlier, we are going to compare that test statistic value with the threshold value, also called as critical value. In order to find that critical value, we are going to focus on the distribution of test statistic. Now let us consider capital delta as the distribution of test statistic. You can see here the equation of capital delta is same as that of test statistic equation as shown in the previous slide. So as per the central limit theorem, this first term follows normal distribution. Second term also follows normal distribution. Hence their distribution also follows normal distribution. So we Now here we know that the distribution of capital delta is normal distribution, means distribution of test statistic in normal distribution. Its mean is 0. Its variance is given by this variance term, uh, which is sum term multiplied by sigma square term. So this is very variance term. In this is nothing but length of s dash, which is known to us. This is length of s2, which is also known. Sigma square is this term. So sigma square is basically variance of f of ti term. F of ti term is basically our this term, which is the part of our delta equation. This is f of ti. So we are going to find this sigma square using the dataset S2. Thus, in the end, we have mean of delta and variance of delta. Thus, we can say that we know the distribution of test statistic. Now, since we have the distribution of test statistic, let us see how to find the critical value to which we are going to compare the test statistic value in order to decide whether there is change or not. So, as we can see in the graph, this is the distribution of test statistic. We know that its mean is 0. We know its variance as calculated in the previous slide. So, in order to calculate Cmax, the procedure which is followed is Cmax is chosen in such a way that the maximum false positive rate is less than the user supplied p-value. So user has given this p-value, and we have to keep the false positive rate below this p-value. In such a way, Cmax value is chosen. Now we have Cmax value. We are going to do inference using the following rule. If our test statistic value delta is less than Cmax, then we are going to declare the change. If the test statistic value is not less than delta, then we declare there is no change in two distributions.
As we discussed all the three algorithms given in our research paper, now we discuss the two-way density test implementation. We have the data and we split the S into the S prime, and we have the S1 and the S2 data from the S. Now we put all these three data into our algorithm to make a decision. Now the algorithm output the result. If the S dash is not equal to the f of s, then it means the distribution of these two data is not same, so we declare the change. Otherwise, if the distribution of both is same, then we run this test in the reverse direction, in which the role of the s and the s prime is reversed, and again we apply the algorithm and we again make a decision. If in both direction there is a no change, then we declare a no change. If in any one of the direction we found a change, then we declare a change.
Now let us see some experiments which we have in our research paper. The first one aims to calculate the false positive rate. Now let us see what is false positive rate first. Now let us say we have two distributions which are exactly the same, but our algorithm predicts that there is change in distribution. So in such case, we call it false positive. Now this experiment is done to calculate the false positive rate. Now what we are going to do is we are going to test for the samples which are from the same distribution. Means we are going to take S and S dash which are from the same distribution. Now we know that they are from the same distribution. Now we put these two samples to the test, and if our test predicts that there is change in distribution, then we call it false positive. We have run this test for 20 instances, and in each instance we are going to do two-way test, and we are going to count how many times out of the 20 instances the algorithm predicts that there is change, and the false positive rate is calculated using this formula: number of times it detects change when actually there is no change, divided by 20, where 20 is the total number of times we are on the test. Thus you get the false positive rate. Now let us understand it using the flowchart. We can see here in the flowchart we have distributed S into S1, S2, then put them in the algorithm. Now if algorithm detects change in S dash, then it is false positive because we know that there is no change in S dash. Now if algorithm detects that there is no change in S dash, then we are going to recheck this using second way test, as I explained earlier. We are going in the second way test we are going to swap the roles of S dash and S, and we are going to run the test again. If again it detects that there is change in S dash, then it is our false positive. But if it detects that there is no change in S dash, then that is not false positive.
Now let's see the experiment 2. Experiment 2 is about the finding the false negative rate. False negative rate means actually is a change but algorithm detected a no change. So we count that rate. For counting this rate, we define a full dimensional data changes. So how we make a changes, we add a Gaussian noise to the all dimension of a some sample. For example, there is 100 sample points. We randomly select a 30 data points and adding the Gaussian noise in the all dimension, as you can see in the flow diagram. So now we modified our S dash and we put the all our three data into the algorithm and we count the false negative rate. If there is a change in S dash, it means our algorithm detect a correct result. But if there is a no change, then we count the false negative rate. Now we see the another type of the experiment too, which is a single dimensional change. Now we add the Gaussian noise to the randomly selected column. So suppose that here we have the 5-dimensional data set. So we randomly selected a one column and add a Gaussian noise to this. Here we can see in the flow diagram one-dimensional noise. So we again put these three modified data into our algorithm, and if there is a change in the S dash, it means our algorithm produce a right result. But if there is a no change in S dash, so our we count the false negative rate because there is actually a change and our algorithm detecting a no change, so that's why we count a false negative rate. And the another way of doing this, add a noise by multiplying a 2 to a randomly selected dimension. So again we select a random dimension and multiplying it by the factor 2, and again the S dash is going to be modified, and again we put this in an algorithm, and again we count a false negative rate.
These are our experiment results. We can see that experiment 1 results are so the expected false positive rate according to the paper is 3 in 100 instances. So that is nearly 3%. And what we have got is 0 in 20 instances. So we have run this test for 20 instances because it is very time consuming test. The time complexity is high. So our result is nearly matching here. For experiment 2, we can see that the expected false negatives according to the paper for Gaussian noise is 0 in 100 instances, which is 0%. For add 1D noise, it is 33 in 100 instances, which is nearly 33%. For scale 1D noise, it is 2 in 100 instances, which is 2%. Now what we have got is false negative we got for full dimensional Gaussian noise is 0 in 10 instances, which is 0%, which is exactly matching. For 1D noise, it is 3 in 10 instances, which is 33%. It is also matching. For scale 1D noise, it is 0 in 10 instances. This is also nearly matching. So our overall results are nearly matching. So these are the data and system specification which we have used in our project. This is the distribution of work which we have done. This is the future work we are looking forward to do, and we are currently working on it. As a part of modification, we are going to work on the image data set and apply the same concept on the image data.
So these are the references which we used for our implementing the project.
That's all from our side.
Thank you.